Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Katie Callan and I am the chair of the Western Transportation Knowledge Network, or WTKN. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start us off by giving you a brief introduction to our speaker and go over a few technical things before I turn the screen over to Ken. For those of you who don't know Ken Winter, he works at the Virginia Department of Transportation Research Library, located at the Virginia Center for Transportation Innovation and Research, or VCTIR, on the grounds of the University of Virginia. VCTIR is a joint venture that was established between the Virginia Department of Transportation and the University of Virginia in 1948. The library where Ken works is physically located on the University of Virginia grounds in Charlottesville, Virginia, but Ken is not. Since 2009, he has been a full-time teleworker, living in Lincoln, Nebraska for 4 years before moving to Maryland in 2012, which is where he is presenting from today. Ken has been a member of the Transportation Research Board's Library and Information Science for Transportation Technical Committee from 2003 to the present, and chaired the committee from 2008 to 2011. And for those of you not familiar with the Transportation Research Board, it's a national organization made up of more than 7,000 transportation researchers and practitioners, and its purpose is to share information and to promote innovation and progress in transportation through research. He has also served as a member of the Transportation Research Board's Information Services Committee from 2006 to present. In addition to these, Ken is a member of the Special Libraries Association. He holds a master's degree in Library and Information Studies from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and an English degree from North Carolina State University. Prior to working in libraries, Ken had a career as a writer and editor in news and trade publications. Ken is an esteemed and innovative member of the transportation library community, and on behalf of the WTKN, we're very glad that he was willing to share some of his wealth of knowledge and expertise on this subject that is new territory for so many of us. And before I turn the screen over to Ken, I'm going to go over a few technical things. For those of you that are new to GoToWebinar, to the right-hand side of your screen, as shown in the slide, you should see a control panel. And if you click on View at the top of the panel in the gray, at the very top area, left-hand side, then you have some different viewing options. You can click on Full Screen to get a closer-up view. If you'd like the control panel to remain open or visible during the presentation, you could go to View and then click on Auto Hide Control Panel so that there's no check mark beside it. Otherwise, it'll minimize during the presentation. And when this happens, if you need to access it, you can do so. There should be a little orange arrow at the top right-hand corner that if you click on it, it'll bring the control panel back for you. As far as audio, everyone except Ken will be on mute during the presentation. This is to eliminate any background noises. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat box in the control panel. And note that the chat doesn't go to everyone, it only goes to Ken and I. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have time to go through questions and comments that you have. Also, we set up sorry, there we go. We did set up a Twitter hashtag if you'd like to tweet about anything that you learned today, as well as WTKN's handle. And finally, the webinar is being recorded, and barring any technical difficulties with the recording, it'll be posted to YouTube, and then the link will be made available to you by email, on Twitter, and also on the WTKN webpage. So that's all I have, and I'm now going to turn the screen over to Ken.
Well, thanks, Katie. I really appreciate that. Let me do a quick audio check just to make sure everyone can hear me okay. How am I sounding?
You sound great, Ken.
Perfect. And the screen is showing?
Yes.
All right, then we can get started. So really, thank you so much for the chance to speak today, and a special thanks to Katie Callan from the Montana Department of Transportation Library and to the WTKN for the invitation. Katie's really done a fantastic job helping organize this and has really impressed me with her organization and creativity. In fact, thanks to her persistence with the technology, I think we'll be able to do some neat things like live polling today and a demo from my iPad, hopefully. We'll see how that goes. And I think she gave you all the details you need to know regarding the polling process, but we'll see how that works for us. I know this was also cross-posted through SLA and probably some other channels, so I want to thank people who did that. While much of what I'll be talking about reflects the transportation library perspective, some of it may be in the kind of the transportation weeds, and I apologize for that. I do believe that, generally speaking, it has a high degree of transferability to other types of libraries as well. So even narrowing the scope of the conversation today, I'll be covering a lot of territory, so I apologize if I move quickly. And if you have any questions or comments, as Katie mentioned, you can type them in as you go in the chat box. I won't really be able to monitor that too effectively, but she'll be looking at that and will help moderate the Q&A session at the end. A couple disclaimers, too. Today, really, I'll be focusing on my library's early experiences with ebooks and the EBSCO ebooks platform in particular. I believe I've really got two audiences today. The first are libraries that focus on transportation, which is my world, and the other is kind of all other types of special libraries that might be joining us. I'm guessing that we've got a lot in common in terms of being modest in size, resources, staffing, and budgets, and working in probably pretty demanding environments. The bad news, unfortunately, for you is that I'm really not an expert on ebooks. I'm just someone who got in the trenches, and really I'm a working librarian. But we got into the game, and I ended up writing the paper that I'll be talking about a little bit today. Also, I'm not a researcher, but I do work closely with researchers, and I believe in employing the research methodologies that will help inform our decision-making. In this case, I had to do some original research because I couldn't really find any that directly applied to transportation. I also believe in the peer review process. I'm going to put in a plug for both peer review in general and the Transportation Research Record, which is the journal that I published in. The good news is that I'm definitely willing to share what I've learned and try to have an honest and open discussion about how it's gone, and some of the results may surprise you. But before we get too far down the road, let's talk about how we define an ebook and frame today's discussion. I'm looking at it very broadly. I don't want to get bogged down in minutia or hair-splitting arguments, but there are three fundamental things that I think define an ebook in the broadest sense. E as in electronic, in contrast to print or other formats. B as in book, and there are many things that are book or book-like, so we'll just kind of keep a broad definition there. And finally, we're talking about something that requires a powered device to be used. So this is, broadly speaking, how we're going to address ebooks today, and that takes us to our very first poll question. The question is, does your library provide patron access to paid ebooks? And when we ask this question, I'm going to let Katie go ahead and throw that up. Before you answer, this is a yes/no. Before you answer, what we are looking for is these are ebook subscriptions that your library budgets for. I'm not talking about free ebooks or ebooks that come to you free through a state consortium or that someone else pays for and you simply promote. These are ebooks that you actually went out of your way to find and purchase. While I give you guys a chance to respond, I'm just going to kind of advance and go forward here. What's out of scope for today's discussion? Well, it's a really huge topic, so a lot is kind of out of scope. Well, maybe I think it is, at least for what I'm going to present. You can certainly ask your questions at the end. It's a huge topic. It's a confusing topic, and really the landscape is shifting rather rapidly. Most of our perceptions, especially your bosses and your colleagues at work, and the people we talk to and that we meet in the common world, their perceptions of the ebook marketplace have been skewed by the popular press and media coverage, predictions about the demise of the printed book, those kind of generic things that the media will cover. They tend to be either very hyperbolic or to focus on all the wrong points. In fact, I think the media focus, again, this is just my opinion, has been almost entirely based on U.S. sales of adult fiction like 50 Shades of Grey and The Hunger Games and those kinds of books. The truth is, there was a lot of exuberance around those. Around 2012, when we got into the game with EBSCO, but the tables have turned and shifted quite a bit. And in 2014, ebooks were outsold by hardcover and paperback by a ratio of 23% ebook, 77 print. In total adult fiction sales, that's the Hunger Games category, were down to negative 8% in 2014. So that's negative 8% for ebooks. And you're not hearing these same kind of stories today in the press that you heard then. Meanwhile, Amazon has moved on to Prime. Ebook readers are more like shopping and shipping devices than they are like ebook readers. And suddenly Apple is making watches and the whole game has changed. So we're having very different conversations today, but we still have to deal with the ebook marketplace. So hopefully there's been enough time to get a response to the first question, which was, does your library provide patron access to paid ebooks?
And can we have the results? I went ahead and closed it so that way everyone could see your slide after that. But the results were that 54% said yes and 46% said no.
All right, fantastic. And how many respondents did we have for that?
We had 87% of our 85 attendees.
Excellent. So what I will talk about today, very quickly, I'll just kind of throw this out and let you kind of soak it in. These are the topics that I'm going to mainly be focusing on, and really focusing on the EBSCO eBooks platform that I wrote the article about. But I'll be showing you a little bit of some other platforms that we use. This brings us to our second poll question. If you answered yes, if you're in that, I believe 54% that answered yes, what vendors do you use? And this may be a tricky one to pull you on because there are so many vendors. This is part of the complexity of the landscape we're in. So Katie, I'm going to let you go ahead and throw that poll question out. And I'm going to move ahead, and we'll stop back in a second to look at the responses there. Very quickly, a little bit of background about VDOT, where I work, and the library where I work. Here's a quick look at some high-level details for the Virginia Department of Transportation. It's a huge public agency, part of state government in Virginia. I don't need to get into trends in terms of funding or the political climate or the other forces that shape what it means to be a VDOT employee, or that factor into my world day to day. And these numbers are not some kind of humble brag. It's actually a huge problem to have such a large amount of infrastructure to operate and to maintain with such a small staff. And I know you might be thinking 7,500 people is not a small staff, but actually the employee levels at VDOT are the lowest they've been since 1965. A couple key points here to bear in mind. Again, VDOT is responsible for a huge amount of infrastructure. We are tied into a lot of critical things, like being close to Washington, D.C., and the massive military-industrial complex around the Hampton Roads. Again, VDOT has a large budget, but a very large responsibility as well. And because our workers are dispersed around the state, that means they're very, very busy people. And they're not just engineers, as you might think. We have a huge business function, not to mention all kinds of general things like leadership, project management, productivity, lots of ways a library like ours could help support these people who are very busy and have a high level of expectations by the public. We also, unfortunately, have a fairly restrictive IT situation where people do most all of their work in Microsoft. And there's more and more use of smartphones and bring your own devices, but no tablets. That's a key point for now. So where do we stand on the poll?
Oh, sorry, we are still getting some of our results in. Let me go back to the first poll. Oh, actually, I can't. Well, this one's in progress, so I'm going to give them a few more minutes or a few more seconds, and then I will read the results out.
Why don't I do this? Why don't I go ahead and talk a little bit about the VDOT Research Library, and then we can maybe hopefully get the poll results.
Sounds perfect.
So really, in terms of talking about our library specifically, as Katie mentioned, we were established in 1948 as a research organization, and the library came online in 1954. A lot has changed since then. Also, as she mentioned, we're located 70-plus miles away from our state capitol and our primary office location, which is very different for a library of our type. We've got a very modest physical space, print collection of about 50,000 volumes. We've got a fantastic staff. Only one full-timer, that's me, and 3 relatively new part-timers. Again, wonderful, wonderful staff, great teamwork there. Core services are what you might expect. one big shift for us has been that when the library was started up until around 2005, we were serving primarily the research arm, the people in the building where our library was located. Again, that's a physical virtual thing. We have shifted gears completely. Since 2006, we've been trying to serve the entire agency. Also, the library is part of VDOT's KM office. KM is part of the research arm. So here's the research arm, here's KM. Here's a quick look at the actual knowledge management office. And you see a kind of a divide here. It's kind of an artificial divide because we collaborate constantly. There's a lot across the aisle conversations and work and support from all our team members, and we work really, really well together. These are the people who have a library science background or are pursuing that right now. So again, we have a huge amount of teamwork and collaboration. But I'll pause for a second and maybe we can revisit that poll.
Yes, we do now have the poll results. For the first one with listing Baker and Taylor Access, EBSCO eBooks, and so on, we had 28% vote, and that may be because some don't have it. Those that do selected these responses. We had 4% Baker and Taylor Access 360, 70% EBSCO eBooks, 26% Gale Virtual Reference, no one with Ingram My iLibrary, and 4% Overdrive. For the second poll, let's see, we had, let me try to go ahead and share this. Let me see if that will work. All right, and hopefully folks can see that, see the percentages there. Be easier than me reading them out. So that was the second poll. And then the last one was these were the results.
Great, that's fantastic.
Yep.
So thank you all for responding. We've got a couple more questions that we'll throw out. It should be relatively simple to do, but I'm going to keep moving forward here. Probably our library's #1 challenge as we look at our kind of a recent SWOT analysis is that of geography. The #1 weakness is that we are geographically isolated. This little tiny dot is us in the middle of the state. These big red dots are the kind of the employment centers for VDOT clustered around Northern Virginia, as you might expect, Richmond, as we would definitely expect, and the coast with some other districts represented as well. The big problem here is that of all those positions, really we can only provide walk-in access, physical access to 1%, and that's just totally not adequate today. It doesn't meet users' expectations generally either. But we've really learned that we can't wait for VDOT staff to come to the library. We've got to find ways to take the library to them. My personal opinion is that the expectations of the workforce have changed and shifted, and the engineers and professionals of tomorrow are expecting and wanting instant online access to top-tier sources, regardless of their location, device, time of day, or day of the week. Now, technology can help, but really our role as librarians, I think, is shifting from that of kind of gatekeeper and keeper of the books in the physical sense to more of a facilitator, and that requires a whole new set of skills. In terms of the self-service access that we're looking to facilitate, we've got some kind of main clusters of resources that we have. We've added 1 to 2 new full-text online databases every year since 2007. They could roughly be classed into e-journals, e-standards, e-books, and kind of an e-other. This feeds well into the self-service model we believe our patrons really like. And the best thing about it is that these types of hosted full-text online databases scale very nicely. So there's no staffing bottlenecks. As long as we can keep them functioning and make sure that people know they're there, they get a lot of use. And so that equates to a success story for us. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have a physical library. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have staff. Our staff are extremely important. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to offer the kinds of traditional library services as well. We're just doing both. Very quickly to look at some of the other ebook platforms we use. At VDOT right now, we've got the ASCE library. We've got Books 24/7, which is a product from a company called Skillsoft, which is huge. It's got nearly 55,000 titles in it, with strong categories of IT and desktop support. Novel, engineers love Novel. This was our first foray into AASHTO content, and for those of you who are not in transportation, I apologize. AASHTO is a key publisher for us. It stands for the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Novel also has some interesting productivity tools and widgets, plugins, and interactive equations and things like that. And finally, most recently, ASTM Compass. We got this about a year ago, and this was our first real deep penetration into AASHTO content with 17 AASHTO ebooks, including AASHTO standards. And if content is king, if that adage holds true, and I believe it does in many cases, as long as the interface is not terrible, this source proves that that people will go for the content. We get about 1,000 downloads every quarter so far in fiscal year 15 from this resource alone. All right, time for another poll question. If your users could pick only one way, one platform to get ebooks, one mechanism or device, what do you think they would use? I know this is asking you to speculate a little bit, but I'd be interested to see how you respond. And it looks like Katie's up in the poll, so I'm going to move ahead and we'll revisit that in a second. This chart shows quickly our physical and virtual library collection growth as of fiscal year 14, which is almost a year ago. You see the growth of print collections. That was us getting our house in order. That's the relatively flat-looking dark blue bar on the left-hand side. What that doesn't show is a tremendous, tremendous amount of work and a huge amount of staff time and other resources, a huge cost in terms of storage and everything else, and basically a doubling of our collection, most of which had been misplaced or disorganized over many years. The thing you do definitely see is a tremendous growth of our virtual collections. What we've noticed is that patrons increasingly choose online over print when we give them the choice. Although the truth of this is that really we're offering both of those, and they're not always duplicative. In most parts, they're supplementing each other. So one does not replace the other. Again, that's an oversimplification. But this is nothing new. This is a trend at libraries worldwide. Of course, not everything is even available electronically. There's the cost due to copyright, IT, and many practical considerations. That's going to be the case well into the future. So these numbers show a very high use of screen-only ebooks. Kind of a look at the actual numbers as of about a year ago. And up till recently, and up until we got the EBSCO ebooks, the screen-only ebooks was really the only option that we were giving people. So one question that's interesting to ask is it an assumption that VDOT employees prefer to use a tablet to access ebook content? And we don't know the answer to that yet. We're learning along the way. So do we have the poll questions available for the last question?
Yes, we do. Let me go ahead and share those. Looks like the highest percentage was tablet computer at 43%, and we had 89% voted out of our 84 attendees.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for responding. This is interesting for me to see and kind of clarify. So lots of other devices that might be used. Here's another question. If you're in that 43% that said tablet would probably be the most popular thing, if people could only choose one at your organization, what make or model or what type of tablet do you think they would most prefer to use? And that poll is open, and that will wrap our poll questions. We'll come back and check on that in just a second, and I'll keep moving ahead and talk about the trial we did and the TRR article. Oops, looks like I'm going to the next poll response now, but I need to give you time, so I'm just going to skip this and get into the article highlights. Here's the citation to the article. I won't go into a tremendous amount of detail because you can certainly read it for yourself. But high level, this is what the article was about. I will say that the purpose of the study was to gauge employee interest in ebooks, to test the ability of employees to use the EBSCO ebooks database at our agency. It may be totally different for you. And to gain some insight into the access options that EBSCO was offering, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. The key question we had in our minds was, can we create a user experience for the patron that approaches the ease and simplicity of Amazon or the other retail vendors? And I'll tell you, it's very, very hard to do. I'll go through this next slide real quick, and then we'll come back to the questions. Some trends and surprises around that time. Again, so much has changed. Tablets were really starting to become the dominant device that we kind of regard them as now, but that wasn't the case necessarily at the time. Nook and Kindle were still in the game a little bit more. One thing that was interesting for me to discover in the research process for my article is that ebook penetration was extremely high in most types of libraries, broadly speaking, based on the results filed by Library Journal, which has probably the most credible library data. And they've been doing that survey for 5 years running now. At that time, academic was at 95%, public was at 70%. Now, public's at 95%, and academic is probably close to 100%. So we definitely don't see this in transportation for the most part. We all live in a post-ebook world, but we're in different parts there. Certainly, we can't offer something that we don't have access to. And I'll get into what publishers in transportation are doing in a minute, how that's kind of affecting us.
Yes, let me go ahead and share. Looks like iPad was by far the most popular choice. And Ken, maybe if you could go back to the past couple slides, that way they could see them again.
Absolutely. So
Sorry about that, guys.
Start right here. Show this briefly, and we will make all of these slides available to you afterwards as well, and our trends and surprises also after the fact. So I do apologize. The good news is that was our last poll question, so we shouldn't have that issue again. So moving forward, looking at the trial that we did and our methodology for the survey, it's really some limitations. We did a 3-month trial of EBSCO ebooks using a government database, which was a small sample of ebooks. There are 3 viewing options in EBSCO ebooks. I'll demonstrate those in a minute. You can look at something on screen immediately, download through Adobe Digital Editions, or you can move it from Adobe Digital Editions to a personal device. At that point, it's what I call quote-unquote fully portable. I think we did a good job promoting the trial. This is before we signed with EBSCO. We had good timing. It was right around Christmas, and the iPad in particular was a kind of a hot Christmas gift, so we kind of marketed from the, did Santa give you an iPad or a tablet this year? You might want to try this out. The result was that we had probably the highest trial of any database that we had tried at that point, 824 full text views and 130 offline downloads. So we were encouraged to move forward. Our survey population, the survey results were really not good, only 32 responses. That's very, very tiny, and really it's problematic to base research on. Our actual survey sample was not all 7,500 because there are about half of the agency doesn't even have computer access. And of that, I would say that about 2,000 people is what I would call the knowledge workers that we were targeting. But again, this was not rigorous research. Here are some of the questions that we had, and this is just some of the questions that we had. There are so many questions. Questions about pricing. Is this going to work from an IT perspective? What do users want? What do they expect? When you say ebook, what are they thinking of? What's going on in their head? So these were some of the questions we had. Also, how will we select? How are we going to acquire these? And the acquisition models is where it starts to get tricky for libraries versus the individual user. We at the time did not have a head of technical services, and EBSCO was offering around 250,000 ebooks, and they have a very nice database for viewing what's out there and making sure it's the right thing and selecting it. We realized that we really didn't have the resources to do that. We would need to select in large collection sets. And these are pre-organized sets. It's not all perfect. So what we shifted our attention to is evaluating the sets. We looked at a number of different sets. We ended up releasing the business core and the engineering core sets. Another interesting option that EBSCO offers, as do some other vendors, it's got different names, but patron-driven acquisition. Basically, this is where you license content through EBSCO, and you can reveal far more titles to your patrons than you've actually purchased, but it's when the patron clicks on it that the purchase happens. So the patron drives that acquisition process, or if you're not feeling that brave or that crazy, depending on your perspective, you can set that button so that you'll be prompted that a patron wants the item that they've clicked on. We decided not to do that, but it's an interesting option. We also did not add the MARC records to our catalog at that time or since. Again, we did not have very much of a cataloging function in place at that time because we had no head of technical services. So the result of that is our ebook holdings for EBSCO did not appear in WorldCat or our library or our local catalog, which is not the case, for example, for Novel, where we did import the MARC records. Some of the funny things we saw when evaluating collection sets, we saw titles like this: Beer, Babes, and Balls, Skajor with Your Dog, if you're Swedish, pardon my pronunciation, Bricks to Brains, Lego Robots, James Dean, the biography. But this gives you a sense, and this is actually very mild compared to some of what we saw. We couldn't justify some of the content, and some of the content would have a much more negative impact than this. So we stepped back and we looked at our core needs, and we actually drafted an internal document titled EBSCO eBook Collection Criteria, where we laid out exactly what we wanted and we didn't want. That helped us out quite a bit. Again, we went with two core sets called Business Core and Engineering Core. When we began to promote the resource, we had communication with users of the trial and certainly survey respondents. We did direct email marketing to them. We had a front page article on our SharePoint instance. We got in the weekly report, which is a weekly email that goes to all employees. We did a webinar hosted by EBSCO on getting started. Created an internal video tutorial showing how the system looked and worked and explaining a little bit. And we spent a lot of time creating some internal documentation, a quick start guide, an FAQ, and how to create an account, which in retrospect was a big waste of our time because of EBSCO. Actually, the portal site has very good promotional materials that we would have been better off just adopting those and sticking our logo on them. What happened next is not a real happy story. We got off to a really strong start, but downloads have decreased every quarter since then. Why is this the case? Well, back when we signed with Novel, we developed with Novel's marketing department a promotional strategy, which is an outline of what we want to happen, when it will happen, who will be responsible for it, and how we will measure the success of that in terms of the use of the resource, kind of month by month for the first year. Things got very busy for us, and we did not use our own strategy, and we kind of suffered because of that. We did gather metrics, and that was good for our quarterly reports. We even reported them up to management, but we just didn't spot the downward trend on that database. And then things got super crazy. Good, but crazy. So the good news is we added some new positions, Bethany and Gil, fantastic additions. We drafted our first marketing and visibility plan to look at it, what we need to do to increase our library's visibility and impact kind of across the board and high level. We implemented a hosted easy proxy, that's remote authentication through OCLC. We established this really amazing content focus group where we actually got VDOT managers and decision makers to come sit in meetings with us to tell us what they wanted. And that has paid many, many dividends. One of the results of our marketing and visibility plan, the number one, is we need to increase our visibility. We knew that going in. The main way to do that, we decided, was by taking the library to them literally, by doing traveling roadshow presentations, as we call them. We did 4 that year to advisory committees and 5 to various divisions around the state, mostly Northern Virginia and Richmond, those major population centers. We had lots of other stuff, and this is all in addition to the stuff we normally do. 2015 kept being crazy. Purchased ASTM Compass, which I mentioned. Worked with our IT to redirect to our library catalog. Created a library icon. This was a kind of neat thing that we pushed out just a week or so ago, which basically pushes a new icon on the desktop of all VDOT computers. It says VDOT Library, and when you click on it, it goes to the URL above, and many more things as well. So I guess this is my way of giving some excuses for how and why we dropped the ball. But if you look at the stats, you can definitely see the ball was dropping, and thank goodness Katie got in touch and invited me to speak today, because when I looked at the stats, I had an oh my gosh moment. Immediately did some promotion, and you can see in Q3 started to turn around. So that tells me that we can correct this problem, and it was probably a marketing and communications issue. So again, our shortcomings in hindsight, we hope that if we got users off to a great start, that they would keep the momentum up. That is pretty much the case for all of our other databases that we've marketed in recent years. They've pretty much just taken off. We didn't really need to do that much. We didn't space our promotional activities out across the whole year. We had a strong first quarter, a slightly less strong second quarter, and then we just trailed off. Key question for us, though, and this is probably not our shortcoming, so it shouldn't be on this slide, How many steps does it take to download a portable ebook? Probably still too many. A couple things have improved since that started. We were able to push in a similar way to the icon the Adobe Digital Edition software that's a part of the DRM for this package to 1,000 known library users. Some issues with Kindle and Amazon compatibility that were really controlled by Amazon and out of our hands got resolved by the vendor. We believe in general more people have greater levels of familiarity with ebooks now than they did back then, and the easy proxy has been a huge thing, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. The big question is, across the board, have they gotten easier for people to use? Well, it depends. The quick answer is yes, but it depends. So first thing to bear in mind, if we're going with the larger percentage of people who reported to the poll question that tablets would be assumed the preferred device, that's kind of what we assumed. The patron must have a personal reading device, first of all. They're going to need to get our IT to install Adobe Digital Editions. This is back in 2013 when we started. Going to have to go to the Adobe site, register for an account, get an ID. Then they're going to have to go to EBSCO eBooks if they don't already have an account. Since we had some EBSCO databases prior to this, about 50 to 75 people already had accounts. They need to create that account. At that point, they can find and download a book, and the book will open in Adobe Digital Editions, and they can move it to their device if they want. So compare that to what you do from your Kindle Fire right now. Not much of a comparison. We streamlined that a little bit thanks to the Bluefire Reader app that we recommend people use, and especially thanks to getting your personal device to remember your username and password or your credentials. That's a big help, but that's completely disabled when you're on our network. That's kind of the IT world we live in and might sound familiar to you too. So there are definitely some advantages to getting off the VDOT network. But if you're returning after you've successfully got everything lined up, it's a pretty quick process for us right now. And again, I'll demonstrate this. Looks like I'll demonstrate it right now.
Ken, I'm going to turn the controls over to your iPad.
Could you hold on for that just a second, Katie?
Yep.
I want to show you what it looks like from the VDOT network, which is kind of part of what we're at. So can you see my desktop at this point and the database?
I can see it.
And I'll just go into one of these titles. This is what the EBSCO eBooks database looks like. The content you license for it depends on what your needs are. Very quickly, on the left-hand side, you see the PDF full text. And again, there's no authentication because I'm being recognized by my VDOT IP address. So you can go right into it with one click. There's another option where you can download to Adobe Digital Editions, which instead of going through this for a complete download, which might take, I don't know, 30 seconds of valuable time, I'll just show you what Adobe Digital Editions looks like. Some of you might have used it, and I'm actually in a book right here. So this is what Adobe Digital Editions looks like. And then to download this ebook offline. So let me pause for a second. Close this. Back to my slides. Oops. And now let's hand the controls over.
Okay, I've given the controls over.
And just a moment while I bring this up. Okay, and tell me if you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Oh, good. All right, so at this point, what we're looking at is my iPad, which is because our agency does not issue iPads, we are off the network, we're kind of off the grid, and show you what this looks like from Safari. I'm going to go ahead and show you what this looks like when we get in from our library catalog. On the left-hand side, we've got the links, EBSCO eBooks. So this is kind of combining our Easy Proxy remote authentication Again, because I'm coming from my personal device, I can set autofill for the password, which is a much more streamlined way to get in and get going. I'm going to go into ebook collections. So I guess I'm demonstrating multiple things here. One, I'm demonstrating remote access, which works for all of our databases, not just EBSCO eBooks. So as long as you have an internet connection and a portable device, let me find the title I'm interested in here. Make waves sounds good. So at this point, if on the left-hand side I touch the download this ebook offline, I'm going to sign into EBSCOhost because it doesn't know who I am. Again, once I've gotten in there one time, I can autofill, log right in. And we have an option to decide how long I want to check this book out for. The default is 365 days, but I can choose any days amount that I want. Check out and download. It's kind of a moot point for this database because one of the things about this database, pause for a second. I'm going to open this in Bluefire Reader, which is a free app. One of the things about this database that was so attractive to us is that it allows us to provide unlimited simultaneous access to the same ebook versus the one book, one user, buying the number of users who could, paying extra for having more than one user at the same time. At this point, it's downloading, and I'm going to read it right now. So once you've been in the system before, you can see how quick and easy it is to get back. You also see some other features. I'll go back to my library and into one of these other titles. Features like your ability to highlight content, to look up words, to place bookmarks, things of that nature are an option here, which is one of the things that makes ebooks a little bit different from a traditional book, and certainly kind of more along the lines of what people are thinking of when they think about ebooks that they might buy from Amazon. So that kind of concludes the iPad demonstration. Why don't we go ahead and hand controls back.
Okay, the controls are back to you, Ken.
Great, thank you. So hopefully that gives you an actual real-life sense of what this product looks like. We'll have some demo time at the end to look at other things if we want to spend our Q&A time that way. But in the meantime, why don't I just kind of keep going with the conclusion of the presentation and talk a little bit about what we've learned. One big thing that is really kind of disturbing, but it's a reality for us, is that we're caught in the middle. You got the patron on one side and what their needs are and what work they need to accomplish, and the publishers on the other. So what we can do depends entirely on what publishers want to do. In transportation, most key publishers have been very slow to get in the game. And the reason for that is it's a complicated game. Publishers don't understand that they don't have to do it all themselves. In fact, it's probably better for them, regardless of what they do, in terms of if they're going to offer ebook content, to just take that ebook content and license it through an information services company like EBSCO or another. This is not a plug for EBSCO per se. They will provide the platform, the secure platform for distribution. Adobe provides the digital rights management. The user provides the ebook reader. The library provides the authentication, and the internet kind of ties it all together. So my sympathies to them. It's a complex world, but we have to serve our patrons' needs. So we really are looking to have dialogues with publishers to get them in the game too. Instead, what some of them are doing is things that might tie the content to a device permanently. Our library is not in the business of procuring printed books or ebooks or anything else for only one person to ever use. So we're just not going to do that with ebooks or anything else. And some focus on a very specific format or some other thing that's exclusive. One big lesson that we thought we had learned, but we forgot, but we're learning again the hard way, is when we get in trouble, we need to turn, really at the beginning, we need to turn to the vendors for their support in marketing. It's amazing what they can do. Some even have massive portals that are filled with promotional materials, strategies. Actually, since talking to Katie and coming online with this webinar, I immediately picked up the phone after doing some quick social media marketing and direct email marketing in my agency to get those numbers to pick up for us. Immediately called EBSCO, said, hey, we're dying out here. And I am now in discussions with both their marketing department to develop a strategy and their customer success department. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But they've got the right title for sure. They've got a lot of resources that can help us out, I think. What we have done or what we should do or what we could do, again, I mentioned some of these already. I think we probably need to load the MARC records for these EBSCO titles into our catalog. We're going to expect to see the usage potential there. We also need to develop a little bit more staff expertise with some of the devices so that we can be ready to respond firsthand, especially with the Kindle. Part of the challenge is that there are so many devices out there, so when someone hits a roadblock and their device isn't working, they might get in touch with us directly and say, what do I do to make this happen? So we need a little bit better familiarity there. And another idea that we've had here recently is that we can have bring your own device workshops or something else. Again, we're going to need to travel to people because they're not, for the most part, where we're at. So maybe we'll schedule that for next April during National Library Week or something like that. I think our central office auditorium would be a good place to do that. That is basically my presentation today. Oh, except for conclusions, I'm sorry. Ebooks are really part of the bigger digital shift. The shift is here, it's permanent. Engaging with customers is a smart thing to do for sure. Talking to them to understand what their needs are first is really kind of critical. We can talk to each other if we need to commiserate in the library world, but we need to understand them first, and then later they will understand what we can do for them. And here are some of the ways. Being realistic about how much complexity they can handle. Again, sometimes this requires sticking your toe in the water a little bit, and how complex it will be for us to support the resource. Definitely engage the publishers in a dialogue if the content's not out there. We're trying hard to do this. Focusing in on ourselves a little bit and your work environment. Do you feel like you have permission to learn in your work environment, which might involve failures? Maybe you do have more than you realize. I mean, are you giving yourself permission? I hope you do, because this is the only way to learn. Taking measured risks, really, really important. Taking risks, but make them measured. Of course, you want to start with the low-risk, high-payoff activities. And I think we've got to do something, because if we do nothing, that's not going to work for us. Always tie whatever you're doing to your business plan. So ultimately, I guess I would conclude by saying that we do exist in a post-ebook world. Not what the media said it was going to be. It's not what the past has been for us, but we can do things that will shape the future for ourselves. We live in a post-ebook world, but it doesn't have to be the end of the world for us, certainly. And that is my conclusion. So this is the conclusion of my presentation. We've reached the time where we can have questions and answers. So why don't we go ahead and launch that? If you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Great, thank you, Ken. And we have had some questions come through during your presentation. So I'll go ahead and get started with those. And if we have about 8 minutes left, if for some reason we don't get to your questions, what I'll do is provide your name and question to Ken, and hopefully he can get in touch with you to answer your questions. So first one off the bat is, out of the 7,500 employees, how many are actual users of the ebook system, since usually not all employees need to use ebooks?
That's a very good question. And broader of all our ebook systems, I would say that number is much higher. Probably, I would guess, around 1,500 to 2,000. But one of the things that we've seen at our agency is we've got a lot of employee turnover. As people come in to realize what our services we offer and find the collection or collections that suit their needs, sometimes they go away and they're replaced by new people into the workforce. So the one thing I can say for sure is that this is why the marketing and communication never stops. People are going to either forget about us or move on. So we've got to find ways to to get back in their space and to remind them. EBSCO, I would say, is one of our less popular in terms of usage ebook databases. And I would say probably our most popular in terms of downloads is the ASTM Compass. The most popular in terms of kind of page views and visits back is Books 24/7.
Thanks, Ken. That's an interesting point about the marketing ongoing. And then the next question, how expensive was it to set up the ebook section of your library?
Oh boy, the whole ebooks part of it. Well, let me start here. Part of it has no cost to us because we realized, for example, with Books 24/7, this was actually already purchased by another division of our organization, our Learning Center. So one of the big hints I have, lessons that we've learned, is to communicate with internally within your organization and see what they need, see what they already have, and find ways to collaborate. In the case of Books 24/7, I don't know how much they paid for that contract. They were offering 5 of 11 collections made available to 50 seats. So we helped them expand to an unlimited seat license based on IP address. And the following year, we helped them expand from 5 to 7 collections, and the following year after that, from 7 to all 11 collections. So that was a zero-cost thing to us. Some of the other ebooks, namely the ASTM Compass, which has a lot of standards in it as well, that was largely financed not by us. It was financed by the managers and their divisions who came to our meeting and had a follow-up meeting where we said, we can explore options to solve your problems. And they said, well, this would be great. Let's do a trial of this resource. It sounds like it might work for us. We did the trial of that. And they ended up largely funding, not completely, we shared costs. But when you divide something that's very expensive up into 1,000 here, 1,000 there, or 5,000 here, 5,000 there, suddenly everyone in the agency gets access and the library acts as more of a central coordinating position. EBSCO eBooks database, as we purchased it right now, the specific cost for that right now is about $17,000 a year for us, and it includes something like 12,500 ebooks. The other thing to know about that access is that it's for unlimited simultaneous usage. So in theory, every employee in the agency could download the exact same book at the exact same time. And checkout period we have set to a year, as I showed. So those are some details around some of the costs, but it's hard for me to tell you all the costs of all the resources.
Okay, thank you, Ken. And then next question, were there any licensing issues with purchasing for your agency, but using them on personal devices?
No. If I understand the question correctly, really the licensing follows the user. And as long as the user is a VDOT employee, then they're licensed in for use. So our strategy, high level, for negotiating all of our contracts for full text content, and this may change one day, but right now, everything we license to everybody in the entire agency. Now, I admitted we have 7,500 employees, but we know that approximately, close to 4,000 don't have any kind of computer access or computer account. But when we negotiate with vendors, we definitely take those people out of the equation because we're not going to pay on that level. But our remote authentication option does bring them back into the ecosystem potentially. But back to licensing. No, licensing follows the user. So at that point, it's up to us to make sure that we don't have unauthorized users in the system. So we have worked with our HR department to make sure we know when people leave the agency, and we remove them from Easy Proxy. And while we were at it, we also decided, why don't you tell us when new people come in the agency, and we'll direct market to those new people. So we create virtual library cards for those people when they arrive.
Thanks, Ken. And let's see, why did you decide not to let your folks click on things and let you know what they were interested in? I think this is referring to the part where you're talking about subscription models, the ones where the users can click on and access them, which ones they would want. And the person says, I can see not letting them make instant purchases, but it would seem you'd want to know what they wanted.
That is a good point, and that point is well taken as well. At that time, the way that model worked from EBSCO, and again, different vendors will do different things. That opened up a wider universe of titles, some of which are wildly inappropriate and would frankly not make us look good, or might actually offend some people because they come from the academic sphere or some other realms. Nothing terribly horrible. You know, we're not talking adult bookstore ebooks, but these were things that could be embarrassing or could offend people. So we certainly would never want to do that. So we couldn't really very easily suppress those. They still had this model of collection sets behind that. The other thing was there were only a couple ways to enable that button. One, we could, at the time, it might have changed it since then. One, we could disable the button and make it not even appear. So we didn't want to show people stuff that they couldn't get to. That would be bad. We could enable the button so that we get an email alert, which seems like a good middle ground. Or we could enable the button so that when the user clicked on it, they're incurring a purchase that hits a debit account. So part of the problem is that it's hard for us as an state agency to have an open-ended account where the more they click, the more the dollar sign, the cha-ching goes off. So we weren't really able or comfortable to do that at the time. I hope that answers the question.
That works. Thank you. Gosh, we're at the top of the hour. There are quite a few more questions, and what I'll do, like I said, is I will send those to Ken. That way he can get back to those who asked as he has time. Thank you, Ken, so much for sharing this information with us. It's great to hear from someone who's pioneered and kind of charged ahead into this field. It's quite the murky area with all this licensing issues. It's new territory. So thank you so much. And thank you to all who attended. As Ken said, we'll be sending out the PowerPoint slides. I apologize for the viewing issues, as well as the recording. And thank you guys so much. I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday and a great Memorial Day weekend. Thank you.